Okay, a little bit more, and then we will talk about maybe some serious stuff. Well, it's all serious stuff. It's just all personality related in the seriousness. And that's all, the only time I'll talk about it. Only if it's somewhat related to a serious topic. If it's only personality, I don't want to even be near it. But Hasan, in a way, kind of like poked it. Hasan really poked this issue. He's really poking it again. And it feels like he's trying to get people to respond to him, because when this clip came out, when Hasan claimed this, I wasn't originally going to respond to it. Let me just play this clip quickly about how he said he was right about Russia.
Had more hope and thought they had a chance, but now it's clear you were right. A ceasefire deal should have happened early. Everyone I know in Ukraine is on the verge of mental breakdown, if not already there. Yeah, but remember, because I said that the 15-point plan that was facilitated in Turkey was actually good, I was actually a fucking hater and I was pro-Russia. Remember when I said that? When Ukraine had the leverage, significantly more leverage than they do now, and I said they should have done the ceasefire deal then, everyone said I was pro-Russia. How many fucking videos do YouTubers make on that shit? Again, I was right, too early. It's okay. It's okay, dude. It's all good. I've been saying it. Haven't stopped saying it. Turns out, you know.
Now, the 15-point peace plan proposal that Hasan endorsed was not the main reason why people are not happy with Hasan. And I think he perfectly is aware it had to do with his predictions, and then his arrogance around his predictions, and then the fallout of the arrogance of his predictions, and his general ignorance interacting with the war multiple times, whether it was the theorizing about the Kiev protesters and right sector all like shooting themselves, or it was the speculation around war crimes by bombing the Kerch Bridge, calling it a war crime. Not a war crime, a terrorist attack to bomb the Kerch Bridge. Those were the things that really frustrated people. But the 15-point plan, right? Let's just isolate on that and not the other things he was wrong about, okay? The 15-point plan that he's referring to was a deal that was supposedly negotiated in Istanbul, but probably was negotiated in Istanbul. We don't know exactly every detail, and it had a bunch of points, but the thing is, whether it had to do with the Russian troops leaving or all the specifics that they eventually negotiated, which would mean the Ukrainians commit to no NATO membership, would mean the Ukrainians commit to this issue of Crimea being settled down the line, meaning that these territorial disputes are not going to be settled. And then a Russian withdrawal of troops could happen in some areas, not everywhere, but in some areas they would pull troops out. But in return, so the Ukrainians, give up NATO aspirations. The Ukrainians possibly give up EU aspirations. We don't know for sure, but I have to go back and check. All the specifics don't really matter. Point is, the Russians would get no NATO in Ukraine. The Russians would not have the issue of Crimea really acknowledged right now or settled right now. They get to keep a ton of land still, and they will have been able to say, look at that. We have stopped NATO expansion. But that's not the only thing they wanted. They didn't just want to stop NATO expansion. If that was it, then that was the only deal, is that Ukraine doesn't need to join NATO. Then it would still not be good that they don't get their land back, but it's not the worst deal ever possibly imaginable. It still would not be good. It'd be giving up something for no reason and not getting nothing in return. But that's not the end of the deal. What Hasan leaves out and has been reported on by, I believe, if we look this up, here we go. It was reported on by the Wall Street Journal. I don't know if Hasan saw this, but this is the deal that he says that Ukraine should have taken while Ukraine, quote unquote, had more leverage. Now, keep that word in your mind for a second. While Ukraine had more leverage. Here is the details of the deal that Hasan says would have given them, they would have had more leverage, would have been much better for them, the deal that they should have taken when offered by the Russians. Here is the terms. A peace plan proposed, drafted during Russian-Ukrainian negotiations in 2022, would see Ukraine turned into a militarily neutered country, permanently vulnerable to Russian aggression, the Wall Street Journal reported on March 1st after reviewing the document. The proposal illustrates the tough concessions Kiev would have had to take to conclude the 2022 talks, which ultimately failed as Ukraine began turning the tide in the war. According to the Wall Street Journal, Moscow plans have largely remained the same, as Ukraine faces an increasingly precarious position in the war, compared by some to the first days of the full-scale invasion. We're going to talk about the situation around Pokrovsk. We do have some updates, positive updates, not all positive, but a lot more positive than usual, as of recent. According to the 17-page document, dated April 15, 2022, Ukraine would be allowed to seek EU membership, but not entry into NATO or any other military bloc. Okay, so EU membership allowed, no military bloc, no NATO, or any other military bloc. So the main thing I was thinking about when trying to get around the NATO question is, okay, is there any other military bloc or any other alliance or defensive pact that could be instituted? For example, if they didn't join NATO, but instead made a unilateral defense pact with the United Kingdom and the United States, so that if Russia invaded again, they would come to their assistance, could you achieve, relatively speaking, the same effect? But this is also saying any other military bloc. Ukraine's armed forces would have to be reduced to a certain size, no foreign weapons would be stationed on its territory, and Crimea would remain de facto in Russian hands. Russia would see Ukrainian forces limited to 85,000 troops, 342 tanks, and 519 artillery pieces, while Ukrainian negotiators wanted 250,000 troops, 800 tanks, 1,900 artillery pieces, according to the documents. Point is, that's not a lot of men to cover the entire country's length of 1,200 kilometer front line. 85,000 men, 342 tanks, 519 artillery pieces. Mind you, at the start of the war, they were able to like scavenge together like around 200,000 plus troops. And Ukraine was barely able to hold the Russians back given those circumstances. Even though, the Russians had a lot of failures, it was still a lot closer than many people remember. And they won an army like 1/3 the size of that. Not only when it comes to troops, but when it comes to equipment as well. I mean, this is calling for less than 1/3 of artillery pieces, cutting the tank stuff almost into 1/3, and a massive reduction of troops. What this means is Ukraine would no longer have an army that would be sufficient enough to stop a Russian invasion. So the Russians were saying, we get to keep Crimea, you don't get to join any defensive blocs that could say, hey, if you invade Russia, we will defend you, and you have to cut down your armed forces to a point that you could not use it to defend yourself if invaded. Because you got to remember, 342 tanks, Russia has thousands upon thousands upon thousands of tanks. This is meant to neuter them. And so if you're the Ukrainians, where the Russians invaded illegally in 2014, Crimea, they then fought a covert war that wasn't even that covert in the Donbass for years and years and years, funneling tanks and shells and everything possible so that they could hold on to that region because they claimed it, because there were Russian speakers there, and to them, they own the Russian speakers. Russian speakers are Russian to them. And after that, they invaded in the whole country in 2022, after Ukraine was elected on a generally after Zelensky was elected on a generally pro-peace platform. At this point, after Putin said Ukraine shouldn't even exist, like Ukraine cannot exist outside of being an extension of Russia, after hearing that open declaration that I want to conquer your country, to neuter yourself militarily, would this not just be knocking down Ukraine's annexation another 2-3 years? What happens when Ukraine limits its troops, cuts down its army size to 85,000? Another crisis happens, and then the Russians have the troops on the border again, and now the Ukrainians don't have an army to defend themselves. Are we just supposed to naively assume the Russians will, respect their word, even though they haven't multiple times up to this point? I just find Hasan's view here naive and ignorant on the negotiations, and it just becomes more annoying due to the fact that he's so supremely confident about it. We just learned the details of that deal. Again, Ukraine would have to give up its armed forces after discovering mass graves on their territory created by the opposing army's armed forces. Now, listen to how he talks about the deal.
Have more hope and thought they had a chance, but now it's clear you were right. A ceasefire deal should have happened early. Everyone I know in Ukraine is on the verge of mental breakdown, if not already there. Yeah, but remember, because I said that the 15-point plan that was facilitated in Turkey was actually good, I was actually a fucking hater and I was pro-Russia. Remember when I said that? When Ukraine had the leverage, significantly more leverage than they do now, and I said they should have done the ceasefire deal then, everyone said I was pro-Russia. How many fucking videos do YouTubers make on that shit? Again, I was right. Too early. It's okay. It's okay, dude. It's all good. I've been saying it. Haven't stopped saying it. Turns out, you know.
It's just the ignorance and the confidence. Also, when he says they had more leverage, to be clear, if Ukraine's leverage is its ability to shoot the Russians that are coming into its country. Once it loses that, there is a strong, hard leverage gone unless you think our troops are going to go there and save the day. So for him saying, oh, they would have had better leverage, or oh, they had better leverage, the deal he's asking for is Ukraine willingly giving up its leverage, its hard power, destroying the Soviet arsenal that they do have left after having destroyed much of it already. Obama wanted to destroy a lot of it. He led a lot of the efforts with others to destroy a lot of these post-Soviet arsenals they didn't want to see showing up in conflict zones around the world. Destroy a lot more of it, militarily neuter them. What type of leverage do they have then? 3, 4, 5 years down the line, you're signing a deal that will destroy their leverage while claiming it's better because of the leverage. It makes no sense to me. Now, I was going to ignore this, but then Hasan said this, and it was like a direct ask to the Ukrainosphere, it feels like. So I was like, okay, well, if he's just poking for attention, then okay, poke for attention. You get attention.
That should prove to all the dumbest that, like, obviously, I'm anti-NATO. I stand on that. I stand by that. But I'm not exactly pro-Russia either, okay? That much should have been clear if you listen to the words that are coming out of my mouth. So I want to ask the pro-Ukrainian losers who constantly were like, Hasan is the #1 enemy of Ukraine. He's the #1 defender of Russia. How many of these spent all this time talking about me and rarely ever talking about Tim Pool and all these other like right-wingers who were literally getting funded by the Russian government to do pro-Russia propaganda? What happened? That's 2 L's in a row. #1 L. #1 L. Russia doesn't know you. Russia doesn't think you're a dissident. Russia doesn't think you're an op. They at least think I'm an op. #2, you spent all this time shitting on me. Turns out you should have been shitting on the conservatives that were getting paid by the Russian government. What happened? What happened? 2 L's for the NAFO and
He's such a victim, man. Who does he doesn't know anything about the Ukraine space. If he looks in the Ukraine space, NAFO, quote unquote, the NAFO annoying dogs, the vast majority of their time is spent going after right-wing politicians like Mike Lee, is spent after going after libertarian types like Dave Comic Smith, or I don't know, Rand Paul, or people who are against aid to Ukraine, or people who are just open propagandists like Scott Ritter, official Russian government accounts and stuff like that. They also go after, Hasan when he says something like that. But the vast majority of their attention has been directed towards the American right, because the vast majority of critique towards aid to Ukraine, and to be quite frank, misinformation about the war in Ukraine has come from the American right. It has come from the American left as well, but mostly the American right. And we've seen how that has had an effect legislatively as well, with the delay of Ukraine aid and how they tried to integrate like immigration policy to Ukraine policy, and it was a failure of Mike Johnson, a failure of Republicans. It did nothing but delay the aid. But we've seen how that has had an effect. And so most Ukraine supporters are super anxious about that party stopping aid. Ilhan Omar voted for Ukraine aid. AOC voted for Ukraine aid. Even Jamal Bowman, before he was voted out, was voted for Ukraine aid. Everybody who signed that one piece of paper earlier during the war was like, oh, I don't know about this. All of them are voting in favor. Every single Democrat is voting in favor of Ukraine aid. Why would they even give Hasan this much attention? Hasan gets the attention primarily because he's the biggest political streamer on Twitch. That's the reason. It has nothing to do, I think, really, from the majority of those people, whether he's left wing or right wing, because I've seen these people tear people up on the right much more than they do on the left, right? People like Jackson Hinkle, for example, which I would say socially conservative. Oh my God, to the nth degree. I wouldn't even call it socially conservative necessarily, but right wing, yeah. The people they're going after are not mostly lefties. There are lefties in there, but they're mostly, in my experience, righties who are having more of an influence on the aid discussion. There are some, and when they do go after them, they go after them hard, but at best, it's 50-50. I would say it's 70-30 more, 75-25 maybe, with that 25 mostly being made up of like hardcore, irrelevant communists without strength in politics anyway. And I legitimately mean that. We're talking about like the Revolutionary Blackout Network or like stuff that these aren't people with congressional seats are going to be voting on the aid. So it doesn't even make sense that Hasan would be the center of attention because he doesn't have that influence. He doesn't have that power. The majority of that legislatively is going to be with people like Mike Lee. It's going to be senators like Ron Johnson. It's going to be those who are leading the crusade against Ukraine. It's going to be J.D. Vance, who is openly against Ukraine aid. Hasan is also against Ukraine aid. He does not want us to fulfill the commitments that we made. But he doesn't have that influence. He's not the main center of ire. It's just that when he speaks on the war, a lot of times he speaks ignorantly, and so he gets that type of reaction. He gets a negative reaction, and now he thinks he's the center of attention, and that all these people were just going after him. No, it's just that these people, many of them Ukrainians, mind you, which he still refuses to talk to because he treats them like a battered wife. I'm going to be honest to you. He kind of treats Ukrainians like battered women and like children in a home. And it's kind of sad to watch because his justification for it is that, well, I don't really speak to Ukrainians because they're traumatized by the war and that wouldn't be fair to da-da-da-da-da. You were speaking to the Houthis, the Houthi dude on, why not him? Yemen's getting bombed the crap like day in, day out sometimes. It's horrible. It's awful. The slaughter, the death from the Saudi bombardment. Are they not traumatized? You brought him on to talk about One Piece and they're blowing up civilian cargo ships. You can't talk to civilians on the bombardment? I mean, are we against giving Palestinians platforms? I would be for giving Ukrainians platforms. It's just every excuse in the world not to talk to the Ukrainians who are a victim of the war who don't agree with him. Every excuse in the world. Every excuse in the world. But he's not the center of attention. He's not the main issue. He's not the main issue legislatively. He's just the biggest streamer. So he gets attention for being the biggest political streamer. That's one thing. And I think he's just viewing himself as the center of attention. For these people like that are critiquing like bad Ukraine takes, it's not that, oh my God, it's Hasan, let's go harder. It's they see a lot of the same takes over and over and over again. When I saw the right sector sniper stuff Hasan was saying, it wasn't the first time I've seen that. That's why I reacted with surprise. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. It's like these are takes that they've seen again and again and again. And when you're sitting there and you're scrolling on Twitter and you've seen those same takes again and again and again, and then you see a clip of Hasan talking about the war and it's the same take, they're going to react as negatively as they would have reacted if they saw it from a right winger. And when you get that response, that doesn't mean that you're the main center of their ire or attention, because they get as much ire, they get as much attention. This is just like Hasan's center of the universe. This is what this is. Hasan's center of the universe. You're the biggest political streamer. You get criticized for being the biggest political streamer, making ignorant comments about the war. The people who are being affected by the war, many of them do not appreciate your commentary about the war. You're going to be critiqued about that. Other right-wingers, in my experience, are the ones that are mostly been focused on. So I don't really see how he's saying he was the main focus. But whatever. That was quick, wasn't it? I try to be fast, okay? I try to be fast for all of you lovely people.